Hi everyone, I'm Karen, 24 years old from America. I know now is a sensitive time to tell my story because it is related to race, but I do believe that the happy ending of my story will somehow help to alleviate racial tensions in the past weeks. After all, we are all human, and we should love each other. I was orphaned at 8 years old because my parents died in a tragic plane crash with no survivors. My grandparents adopted me because my father was the only child they had. They nurtured me with all the love and care that anyone yearns to have. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they would die for me if anything happened. I understand that is what most parents and grandparents do, but the tragedy that happened to my parents had created a much closer relationship than a regular family relationship. I am extremely grateful for that and have always looked up at them. They have always been good role models for me to follow in every aspect of my life. From childhood to adult, I have never seen either of them treat anyone unfairly. And they have always taught me to be the same. I idolized them immensely. Until recently. Yes, I encountered the second shock of my life when I saw the reaction of the two people I loved most toward the third person who also meant so much to me. That third person is Tom, my 26-year-old boyfriend. We knew each other from work. Tom is caring, gallant, and a very friendly man. He has a muscular body thanks to his workout routine. In general, Tom has no negative points. The first meeting between my grandparents and Tom was a disaster in my mind. At that time, Tom and I had been dating for a year and a half. We were happy and ready to discuss with our family about our marriage, so I took Tom to meet my family for the first time. The four of us agreed to have a dinner date at a local restaurant. The moment Tom and I walked into the restaurant and headed to the dining table where my grandparents had been waiting, they were so shocked that they couldn't close their jaws until we sat down. During the meal, although Tom was extremely friendly, I felt that there was a big problem that made the atmosphere of that dinner so awkward. My grandparents tried to hide their emotions and successfully did that to Tom, but I could see it clearly on their faces that they weren't happy with my choice of boyfriend. After that meeting, my grandparents became stricter with my daily schedule. Whenever seeing me dressed up to go on a date, my grandmother would feel uncomfortable and make sure that I knew. My grandfather tried to mention that I should change jobs several times without further explanations. When I asked both of them if something was wrong, they both diverted into another topic because they didn't want to be too straightforward and made me feel bad. But I knew that the problem lied with Tom. They didn't like this guy. But I became more stubborn, mainly because I never thought my grandparents were racist. From my childhood to adulthood, they always behaved properly and civilized. That was why their reaction to Tom shocked me. I decided to bring Tom home more often to gradually win their hearts over. They didn't object to that decision of mine, but they would not make it easy on Tom. They criticized him for the smallest things, like the habit of using forks with his right hand and knife with his left hand, or the fact that he eats faster than normal people. They always judged what he said and acted more harshly than necessary. I tried to be patient and convince them that he was a really good guy who loved me and cared about me, but it was useless. Tom was smart enough to see everything, but surprisingly, he never questioned me about my grandparents' attitude. Even more surprisingly, 2 months after meeting my grandparents, Tom proposed to me. It was the happiest moment of my life. When I told my grandparents, they were very sad. This time, unlike before, they didn't pretend to hide their emotions anymore and told me why they didn't like Tom. It was because of his race. Needless to say, I was upset. My mother is Asian. My grandparents did not need to exert much effort to accept their son's marriage to an Asian woman. They loved her like their own daughter. They also became good friends with my grandparents from Singapore. As you can see, the problem with my fiancé was not about racism in general, but it was discrimination against black people. I tried to tell my grandparents that they had no right to say such wrong things about Tom, and they were extremely rude. They tried to justify that they were only hoping the best for me. They lived longer, thus would have more experience than me. But I didn't obey anymore. I told them that unless they treat my fiancé respectfully, I will not discuss with them about my marriage anymore and will take care of everything by myself. All my friends agreed that I should oppose to my grandparents and take control of my life. And I listened to them. Although it was heartbreaking, I told my grandparents to either accept Tom or I would cut all contacts with them. At the end of the angry conversation, I ran out of the house and drove to see Tom. Tom knew my grandparents didn't like him from the first time they met. I couldn't help it and told Tom everything. I vowed that I wouldn't let this affect our relationship at all. However, to my surprise, Tom reacted calmly. He told me that he had experienced similar things before and was willing to face this challenge when proposing to me. He just needed to know that my feelings for him were genuine. Other things didn't matter. More than words, after we talked seriously about our future, Tom decided that he would not rob me of my grandparents. On the contrary, he would give them more opportunities to change their minds and correct their mistakes. He's the most altruistic person I've ever known. Although not respected as he should be, Tom advised me to behave like a more mature person. He said that while my grandparents were certainly wrong to discriminate against him like that, he was grateful that they gave me everything they had and more to feed me and give me the best life I could have. They are the reason I am me today. They are always with me, taking care of all my needs and always putting me above them. How could I give them up like that after everything they'd done for me? I fell in love with Tom more after those words. And from that day, despite having to deal with the unwelcome attitude of my grandparents, Tom still maintained the habit of coming to dinner at their house twice a week. He was even friendlier when chatting with them, and after a few more times, I realized they were getting more and more relaxed and engaged in conversations together. Tom and my grandfather were both passionate about World War II, and my grandfather had never had anyone to discuss this topic with until Tom. I decided to tell the story because last night something very special happened. I arrived at my grandparents' house for dinner before Tom and I could see the obvious disappointment on their faces when they thought I came alone. They asked where Tom was and when he would come, and they were determined not to start eating until he arrived. I had to stop myself from crying out of emotion. What do you think of my story? Let me know in the comments.